Welcome to another episode of the Vento Aureo episode analyses. This one's episode 6, and in fact, now that we're on another multiple of 3, all the comments from episodes 4, 5, and 6 will be featured in a Q&A. So if there's anything that you want to ask with regards to these Vento Aureo analyses, then certainly leave a comment. And any other very interesting comments that you happen to post, I'll also be discussing in a future video. So I just wanted to alert those of you that didn't know, because I've gotten a lot of subscribers recently. My previous video, episode 5, already has 1,000 views in a week, which is kind of crazy, I think, considering that episode 1 still only has about 200 or so views. So yeah, it's really kind of crazy how this is all happening so fast. This one, firstly, doesn't cover that many chapters. Whereas, we've kind of been going at an average pace of 4 or 5 chapters every episode, this one only covers 3 consecutive chapters, and then a little bit from way in the future, actually, all the way from volume 6, when this specific fight actually happens in volume 3. So volume 6, what could that be? Well, it's actually Abakio's backstory, and that's how the episode starts, so let's get into it. Already there's a lot of things that I like and dislike. Firstly, there's this introduction of this new pose, which, it's not that I dislike the pose, but rather I like the pose in the manga so much more. I mean, in a way, that's a really iconic pose of Abakio, like looking so proud and so happy, and he's literally shining with joy, right, at becoming a policeman. And we don't really get a representation of that here. Obviously, his pose kind of reflects that, his chin is up. But the frame in the manga that I'm talking about is one of the few ones where Abakio is actually smiling. And he's got such a brilliant and decisive look in his eyes that you basically never see for the entirety of Vento Aureo. So it's really kind of cool to see that frame. And we don't see that here. It's off in the distance, firstly, as opposed to like a close-up of his upper torso. So that's already kind of distracting from its overall quality. But on the other hand, we get this beautiful contrast of Abakio as he is now. He's got the eyes as we see here with like the gradiated effect, and here we can see he's only got like the blue eyes. So it's kind of interesting that they're playing with that. Later we'll see kind of a contradiction in this particular coloring where it is just a blue and it's not gradiated. And of course in the previous episode I was talking about how Abakio's eyes are so different from all the other eyes in Vento Aureo because of how he kind of put his own fate into motion and caused his own demise. So that's, the fact that his eyes here are just colored blue without the gradient is kind of evidence for that. But like I said, we can talk about that more later. Beautiful little animation here from forming the transition. I really just love, once again, the weighted lines forming the majority of the art. But also how smooth the animation is and how 3D it is, like just the way he actually walks across the screen and it's not just like a still image sliding across. Obviously there's a lot of work being put into that, but also the idea of Abakio putting on his hat, that's an idea from the manga and they've really given it form here. That's like the very next frame in the manga, and they've really given it a lot of life here, and they've really made it a profound and significant part of Abakio taking up his role as a police officer, and it's really rewarding to see that, I think. But like I said, like here he's already got the gradiated eyes, transitioning from purple to yellow, so it kind of defeats that theory that I was talking about. But you wonder then why he has just flat blue eyes here particularly, or whether that just had to do with the color swap for this particular outfit that he has. But yeah, no, like a beautiful, beautiful animation. If I could go frame by frame. Does Crunchyroll have frame by frame? Please implement that. For JoJo, please. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that makes you all the more likely to torrent, because you can actually open VLC with your torrents or whatever anime watching software you use. Because, watching Chinese cartoons is a serious hobby, and you really need to have the best technology. But yeah, no, like, it's watching some of this stuff frame by frame that makes watching animation so rewarding, if you're kind of crazy like I am. But even, Disney stuff is really rewarding frame by frame, because there's so many cool techniques that Disney employs, even in like their 90s stuff, which some people consider modern and not very cartoony, but they still make a lot of use of the 12 principles of animation, and Aladdin especially is just like crazy wonky, and they do all kinds of crazy stuff with squash and stretch. So it's really fun to see that kind of stuff frame by frame, and it's really fun to study animation in that way. And Crunchyroll, a site entirely dedicated to watching animated content from Japan, doesn't provide it, and it's quite frustrating, I'd say. This frame is taken almost directly from the manga. I'd say The only difference, interestingly, is the background, like the police, and that the police car is actually reversed. So in the manga, it's actually facing this way. that's such a weird change. Maybe for this particular CG model, the back looks terrible, but the front looks really good. So they were like, all right, let's just turn it around. I mean, I do know that they cracked the windshield later. So maybe it was better to direct the action of the rocks being thrown from this direction rather than from this direction. I don't know. Anyway, the background, they changed it so it's like much more modern. I mean, the background in the manga looks kind of like Morio, actually, like 1999 Morio. So you wonder whether this is like Naples as it is today, with this fancy, like, I don't know, modern architecture, I suppose. I'm not an architect, as you can see. How would you describe this? Any architects in my comment section, or any artists that can accurately describe how exactly you would describe this in terms of like public arts and public architecture and stuff. Yeah, you wonder whether this is actually something that you would find in 2001 Naples, or if there's something that's a much more modern edition, and the anime researchers, let's say, found this and were like, oh, this looks really cool, so they just threw it in without having a proper historical understanding of when this was installed. Maybe Abakio looks really good here. And this part of Abakio's story, I think, is perhaps the best. Just this very obvious contradiction, right? Like, the people who the police are trying to protect are also the people who are ruining the peace. And you wonder how real police people handle that kind of contradiction, and, you know, the amount of cynicism and paranoia, I guess, would be kind of an exaggeration, but does carry the spirit of what I'm trying to say. The amount of fear that they have for the common people that they just, like, engage with on a daily basis. And you know, I don't want to make this political, but you hear about like police shootings and stuff, right? And especially in America, and you really wonder like how much of it is on the cop and how much of it is on the people that are shot. Now, some of these are really truly tragic, like for a child to be shot for playing with, it wasn't even a toy gun, was it? It was just like a toy because of the color of his skin or anything like that. It's, you know, it's not anything that I would condone on any level, but I think Araki, of all people, raises a really interesting point to maybe like have some sympathy for the figure of the cop and the kind of contradictory and crazy worlds that they are involved in, where the exact people who they should be protecting are also the people who scorn them, are also the people who are constantly breaking the law, and are making the world dangerous, and they're trying to restore the peace. So it's a really fascinating thing for Araki to touch on so briefly. And, you know, it's hard to say that he does it justice because it is such a layered and complicated issue on so many levels. It is so interesting to see that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, of all possible texts or manga or anime, is actually the one that just says it straight up loud without subtext and without equivocation. It's just like, hey, here's a cop who's conflicted about protecting the people that he should be. And it's so blatant, and I love that, and I love Abakio for being the vessel for it. So there you go, there's the breaking of the windows, which, you know, this is the kind of stuff that I really respect David Production for. You know, making some of the figurative stuff that Araki just kind of plops down on text very, very literal. And in fact, I was going to say this, and I totally forgot to mention. In the background here, you'll see like all of these characters are all kind of grayed out with these black intimidating eyes. In the manga, it's actually like they're completely shadowed, right? So the entire crowd is just a big blur of purpley haze. No pun intended. Which kind of says that, you know, like Abakio's distinct from the crowd, and he doesn't really know how to dissociate identities and separate people from the general public, right? Like everyone is some level of threat, and also everyone is some level of generic human being. Here, they actively portray everyone as somewhat scary and somewhat alienated from Abakio. And so that's a really, really cool way of portraying that divide for Abakio, where, you know, as I was saying with paranoia, it really does feel like you should be afraid of every human being if you were in Abakio's position. It's kind of strawmanning the case, but at the same time, it presents Abakio's situation really, really well. What if you became a police officer to protect the people, and then had the sudden suspicion that all the people you were protecting were actually just out to get at you and laugh at you? And that's the kind of cynicism that ultimately ruins Abakio. And it really is pretty tragic, so I'd say it's done really well. And so yeah, that makes like Abakio's paranoia very literal, and here they make the smashing of windows very literal. So they make the antagonism that Abakio feels towards, you know, these normal citizens, and the antagonism that these citizens feel toward any police officer whatsoever, very obvious and very literal, and they don't play by subtext or use the excuse of loyalty to an adaptation in order to present this stuff very, very meaningfully. And I respect that. You know, I said in episode 1 that some of the stuff in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you don't have to explicate to such a degree, and you don't have to ham it up to such a degree, because it already is kind of crazy and ridiculous, and there are elements of it that, to make it obvious, feels heavy-handed. But this stuff, I think, is excusable, because this is the kind of stuff that I think Araki rushed through and didn't do justice to in the manga. I guess to preserve panel and page space. But here, by making it literal, you really do get into Abakio's shoes, and you really do understand his confusion and his fear. And see, look, like they've got the shadowed eyes as well, and this guy's even laughing, so it looks. So yeah, you really get to feel Abakio's alienation to these people. And then that again, I just want to point out how good animation this is. I don't know, something about the way the lady just falls. Obviously the bike is a bit janky, but I think just the way the humans are animated actually are really quite well. Like they're really like loose and fluid. And then see this little punch him, Abakio. Seriously, just I love, they nailed this guy, his voice, his like choreography. The I don't mean to be vulgar, but the whore even gets a line that isn't in the manga, so that's really kind of interesting. And especially Abakio, like his expression from the manga, they do it so well, and they even have the color swap. It looks so good. And see, like his pose, see, like, God, this is the kind of stuff that's so powerful. Like, you can really just enunciate so much body language with animation, and then in anime, everyone just kind of stands like this all the time, and it's just so dull. Like, come on, let him breathe and let him just be all kind of gloomy and dull, and there you go. This is the power that you get out of it. Like, look at how just like droopy he is. Oh, poor Abakio. And then also this, like the way he kind of circles around Abakio. Let me go back like a frame. Can I do that, Crunchyroll? More or less. As though he's kind of like hunting Abakio essentially, and he's, you know, he's circling his prey and telling him, you know, you can't escape from this choice that you've made. Is so, God, they really make it so good. I don't know if choreography is a good way to put it. Hopefully you guys understand what I mean by choreography. Like, if this was physical, if this was actually acted out, and look at that expression on his face, by the way. God, really, the animators nailed it. But you know, if this was physically acted out with real actors, then there'd be a director off camera just yelling like, "Alright, now walk around, Abakio, and look kind of creepy and aggressive. Abakio, put your head down lower, you look too happy." Stuff like that, right? Choreography, I think, is a really good way of describing it, but animation has the specific liberty of presenting any action that they think is interesting, even if it isn't believable. And here, you know, the unbelievability is, of course, like just his expression and the way he looks like he's making eye contact with Abakio, but like, if you actually tried making your eye look like that, you would look really freaking stupid, I'd say. Like, you'd be staring at essentially nothing. Like, you kind of look like you were looking up at the ceiling there, at the building there. But because animation allows for this, it really does look like he's making eye contact with Abakio and really threatening him. And even though he's a much lower height than Abakio, it actually, you know, because of Abakio's gaze, how low his neck is and how drooped his shoulders are, versus this guy who's just like exuding arrogance, essentially. It really feels as though Abakio has the worse hand, or I guess another way of saying that would be this guy has the upper hand in this confrontation. So, like I said, like a really good choreographing of this particular scene, even though it's really just like a throwaway scene. Abakio looks so good, but so sad at the same time. And so there you see, like, it'd be great if his gradiated eyes like kicked in there, but they showed before that he already had those, so kind of a shame. His voice actor is so good. And of course, this isn't in the manga. The reason it's here is two reasons. One, to show that the intruder has a gun. And secondly, it's to show that Abakio's partner knows that the intruder has a gun, which in the manga wasn't clear at all. So that's Abakio's partner, who looks kind of like him actually, but I think that's just David Productions' mimicry of Araki's art style, and how kind of everyone in Araki's art style looks a bit similar, especially if they have the same clothes. So brilliant use of, I don't want to say Chekhov's gun because it's a little bit too immediate, but whatever. Really brilliant. And of course the editing, that sudden jump cut to his face, him pulling out the gun. And of course, finally we get the payoff on him recognizing that he's got a gun. It's still kind of crazy that he actually jumps in time to save Abakio, considering he couldn't possibly have known that he was about to draw the gun. But I think, the end result is a lot more powerful than, well, Abakio getting shot and then dying, and then we wouldn't have Abakio as a character. So in terms of just pushing the plot forward, I think as kind of crazy and stupid as this intrusion is, it still gets the point across really well. So yeah, it's a stupid moment, but it's a very forgivable moment, and I feel like that's basically the definition of JoJo. Stupid but forgivable, because it's got so many other amazing qualities that you just kind of let happen to enable other really cool stuff, like Abakio, falling into darkness in both body and mind, as the manga points out. And then, yeah, this I think is kind of a crazy moment where he's talking, but it's literally just a still frame. I don't think it's so offensive, but that's the kind of thing that I would expect the Blu-ray to fix, right? Beautiful shot here. I love this so much. I'm pretty sure this is actually Abakio's hat, which I think is a beautiful touch. Abakio, we saw him putting on the hat before to take up his role as a police officer, and now with his friend's death, he loses his hat once again. And in fact, when we see his friend later, and even in the manga, when his friend dies, his friend still has the hat on him. So it's like he embodied the nature of a police officer, right? Like he's like the ultra police officer that Abakio aspired to be, but realized, the world was just too corrupt to meaningfully play that role. And what did he get? Well, he got death. And Abakio didn't, but at the same time, like, is death really such a undesirable state when people like Abakio's partner are dying in such a noble and heroic way as to save his own friend? And, well, that's stuff that we'll be discussing when we get later into Abakio's story, let's say. And, maybe in the future we'll see some reference to Abakio's partner. I don't know. A bit hard to predict, isn't it? No, but really, so beautiful symbolism. And of course, this descent perfectly centered. Let me clear all this crap. The fact that it's perfectly the center of the screen, and just the way this cap descends directly vertically is reminiscent of the shot of the bust in the opening that turns into sand as it crashes, and Abakio picks up that sand as he looks back on his past. And I'm sure you guys will know. And I talked about that in episode 2 when the opening first came out. So I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, then I have another video on the opening coming up, a second look at Fighting Gold. So I'll definitely be talking about it there. But yeah, this shot is definitely designed to evoke that moment in the opening, and it's done so well. And of course, the symbolism with him putting on the hat and then now it's falling off of him forcibly with his partner's death is really just brilliant stuff. Araki didn't draw attention to it, but I think it was still intended in that case, like him putting on his hat and then the hat falling off. But here they draw attention to it, and like I said, making stuff literal makes it so much more interesting. And I don't fault David Productions for it. It's just when they go really big dick on making it as obvious as possible, as they did with the anime original scenes in episode 1, that I feel like I have a problem with it. And then this animation of Abakio just like heaving. It's so good. Abakio. It's so smooth as well, like I love it. Anyway, so yeah, like he's still got his hat, as you can see. Beautiful wail of despair. That wasn't in the manga, but it totally shivers down my spine. So good. This voice acting, they've really got like 10 out of 10 voice actors for everyone in Vento Aureo. Like even Leaky Eye Luca had like a baller voice actor, or Seiyu, considering it's the Japanese voice actor. As I said in episode 5, it's really only Narancha's voice actor, or Seiyu, that I've really, not been impressed with. But I'm sure it will grow on me as we get to like Narancha's actual episode and stuff. This exact frame is pretty much taken from the manga. And I think it's a really interesting frame to adapt so loyally, right? Like these buildings just coming out of the sky with the rain. You wonder, what is maybe Araki trying to represent with, just showing the skyline with the rain. Obviously, there's the idea of pathetic fallacy that the rain is representing Abakio's sadness. Like, that's very obvious. But you wonder what the skyline is maybe trying to communicate. Some of these lights are lit up, right? Which wasn't in the manga, and I was trying to see if there were any like silhouettes that you could possibly make out, and I don't think there are. But you wonder maybe if they're trying to say that, there are lives that are being lived here, and Abakio can no longer be responsible for them. Like, he threw away that the chance that he had to be a good police officer, and he threw away the chance to live up to the ideal that his partner represented. Does his partner even have a name? I don't think he does he? That's kind of a shame. So yeah, like this idea that Abakio no longer has responsibility over these people. And in fact, when Abakio, well, spoilers I suppose, but I mean, we've talked about spoilers previously, and I'm not planning on giving up spoilers just to, get a few more views from people who are only anime viewers. I mean, I got a few comments from some of you people who are like, I'm an anime only and I love your videos. And I was like, wow, that's so touching. Like, really, and I don't want to spoil you guys because I really love Part 5's story, and I don't think it deserves to be spoiled. This is the kind of story that you really just want to go with the flow and, see where it takes you, and really just kind of involve yourselves with the characters and see the outcomes of it, and, feel the despair that Bruno feels, and feel Bruno's anger, and feel, Giorno's resolve, and follow his dream and all this other stuff. And I could say similar things for nearly all the other characters, but the fact that some of you guys are willing to sacrifice that just to watch my videos is really very, very touching. As foremost a JoJo fan, I hate to say that because I don't want to spoil JoJo for you guys, and I don't want to enable the spoiling of people, right? Ideally, if you're an anime only, I want you to turn off the video right now. For those of you guys who prefer my contents more than the unspoilt experience of JoJo, then I can really only say fuck you and thank you. But no, yeah, anyway, so when Abakio dies, I hope you've clicked off the video by now if you didn't want to know that. Don't want to hear no bloody complaints in the comments. When Abakio dies, we see him in the clouds, and you wonder if this is some kind of foreshadowing to that. And of course, when Abakio dies, the sky is, like a bright blue. Like I was saying, pathetic fallacy. It's a representation of Abakio's mental state. But at the same time, it's almost like when Abakio dies, it's in such a way that the natural world itself recognizes Abakio's valor and his redemption. And it says, well, hang on, I've just been drawing nonsense. Let me clear that out. If this was the world that gave you your miseries, then the world that let you escape from those miseries and really establish yourself as someone who believed in rightness and believed in things that are good and believed in truth, right? Which is a pretty important aspect of Abakio's death scene. The world that you get is not this dreary, clouded, rainy sky, but is instead this beautiful sunny day, and Abakio himself is embedded in that sky. So it's really a fantastic, fantastic scene. And this, I think, kind of foreshadows it, or is juxtaposed with it, I think. Abakio. My heart. My heart. So this specific line of, this specific line, no matter who died or even if he lost a limb or two, is actually from the Man in the Mirror fight, which is when Abakio's backstory actually happens, in which fight he does actually lose a bloody limb. And that's actually kind of the point of it, right? The line immediately after this in the manga is, what Abakio learns from this is that the only time he can achieve inner peace, and I'm quoting from the manga, is when he is following orders from a grand and absolute entity. And the order that he happens to specifically be following in Man in the Mirror is the boss's second assignment: retrieve the key to Kokojumbo. So you wonder, by putting this line here in the soft machine fight, you wonder if they've kind of lost the opportunity to reuse it in the Man in the Mirror fight, where it is a bit more meaningful, and you get a better grasp of where Abakio is psychologically, right? Because he is willing to just basically commit suicide just to, and this is really kind of cynical and depressing, to be honest. He really doesn't feel like any attachment to the world whatsoever. His heart has hardened. For those of you who are fans of the Harry Potter franchise, if you've read the Tales of Beedle the Bard, you'll know there's a story called The Warlock's Hairy Heart. Abakio has that hairy heart. He's locked it away in the basement of his castle, right? And he's not gonna unlock it for anyone unless they happen to be like a really beautiful princess. And the princess asks nicely, does that make Giorno a princess? Hello? Metaphors? Seeing Giorno's resolve, if you will, is kind of the key to unlocking Abakio's hardened heart, as the manga makes very clear, is the golden wind that changes Abakio for the better. So in a way, it does make sense to put it here in the soft machine fight, because that is exactly what Giorno does on some level, right? Like he says, Abakio, have faith, believe in what I say, because it's no good to just be cynical and to hate people who are confident in their beliefs and confident that they can win and that they can save their friends, which Abakio, is very hesitant to do in the previous episode because he's afraid that Giorno will see him. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter if Giorno sees you. If Giorno was the villain all along, just kill Giorno too, right? Like that's kind of the mentality that Giorno imbues into Abakio on some level. Like fight for what you believe in. And uncover the truth. So yeah, so it's interesting that they pair this off with Soft Machine is what I'm trying to say, even though, in the manga it was paired with the Man in the Mirror fight. And I think that pairing is actually a bit stronger and a bit more meaningful. I wonder what you guys think about it. I wonder if you guys think that it was more powerful to put Abakio's backstory here instead of where it actually belonged in the Man in the Mirror fight. The interesting thing about Man in the Mirror now is that there is no backstory for Man in the Mirror, because as much as it was Abakio's fight and Fugo's, we only actually ever got Abakio's backstory. So does that mean they're opening up a spot for Fugo's backstory so that we can go into Purple Haze feedback? Is this dictionary hype, boys? Is there a professor who's gonna get beat over the head with a dictionary? Oh, that's the second thing I think that I'm really looking forward to. Of course, we missed the camera moments in the previous episode, which some of you were commenting. In Purple Haze feedback, there's this moment just before they get on Bucciolati's lagoon, where Mistus asks Giorno to take a picture of the group, and some of you, the more optimistic of you guys, were like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. They can show that picture in a flashback." And, this is the second chance now. What if they put Fugo's backstory in the Fugo fight, in the Man in the Mirror fight, now that they've gotten rid of Abakio? So, it won't be like backstory overdose in those particular episodes. I mean, what a beautiful frame. They showed this in Abakio's preview. And beautiful, beautiful shading. Love the blacks. Love the color scheme. And in fact, even his gradiated eyes look a bit different. Like the yellow is so diminished. It's just at the very bottom of his eyes, and the vast majority of it is just this purple dimness that is just eating all the light in his eyes. So this is pretty interesting. I'm pretty sure, everything after this is all anime original scenes. And I'm pretty sure, it's hard to say, but I'm pretty sure this is where, this is the window where the guy was trying to run out of. This is the door that Abakio's partner came through. And this is exactly where Abakio was standing when his partner died, I think. It's kind of hard to say. So it's kind of interesting that they position Abakio like this. Like here he is drinking his troubles away, only ever focused and reminiscent of his failures and his mistakes and how far he's fallen from the noble path that he was trying to walk when he first graduated high school and decided to become a policeman. It really is very depressing to see this. I'm glad they don't make it super explicit and they don't go ham with it, but, just the various details. Of course, Abakio's character design when they do close up on him. And, of course, the fact that he is in exactly the same place where his partner died really communicate that very effectively without just being very blatant about it. There you go. Beautiful close-up. And I love the fact that he's bleeding and they don't even explain why. He just is, right? This is this stray dog life that he now embodies, and he's got nothing else to aim up and look forward to until Bruno comes along. And we'll see more of this scene later. And Abakio looks super good here as well. God. I like the fact that his two eyes, they're not like perfectly level, so this one's kind of drooping a little bit. I don't know if you guys can see that, but beautiful artistry. Artistry. Got it. Only just about got it. So yeah, pretty much exactly the same shot. It really is still very hard for me to tell whether this is Abakio or his partner. I'm tempted to say Abakio. It is Abakio, maybe? Like the eyes especially. And it's harder to say which one is more meaningful to the next shot, where Abakio is picking up the sands of his of this broken bust. Would it be, you know, sadder, or, you know, like more heartbreaking, whatever you want to call it, for this to be Abakio himself picking up his past? Or would it be more emotionally profound? What a stupid phrase, emotionally profound. But I guess that's the best I've got. Would it be more emotionally profound for Abakio to be picking up the bust, the shattered bust of his dead friend? Which of course also symbolizes his past. And I kind of prefer the second option, just because I think there's that added symbolism of the fact that not only is the shattered bust his dead friend, so there's, you know, a very strong symbolism there of death and irrevocable destruction, but also, you know, Abakio picking up his partner's sands is him reminiscing on what he could have become, right? So we've talked about how his partner was the ideal policeman. And so Abakio's kind of seeing himself in here, in this statue, rather than actually literally seeing himself. Does that make sense? I think that's a lot more meaningful and certainly a much more interesting idea. I wonder how people feel, like anime onlys felt about watching this scene and then going straight into this. Must have, you know, been a bit... But they're probably like starting to understand like where all this is coming from, and it really, really makes me happy to think there are people who are still enjoying JoJo's Bizarre Adventure on like a completely novel viewers, right? And they're just being fascinated by what's coming up on screen. And of course, not only the superficial stuff, which is something that I've been very, very insistent about. Not just, oh, it's a color swap, but also, you know, just like the narrative depth that comes in with these characters, and how much more interesting they are than like Joseph, for instance. I will also say that at this point I expected some changes in the opening, but given that, you know, I've said that twice now and neither of them have happened, I'm pretty confident that we're not going to get any changes whatsoever. And like I said, I've got another video coming up about the opening, so I'll talk about it more there. Fighting God! Yeah! Hype! I don't know how many of you guys still, like, you know, enjoy this opening or don't enjoy this opening, or have gotten sick of it or have gotten used to it. But I've got to say, I'm really in the latter camp. I've really, you know, it's like started warming up to this opening. It's still not my favorite, not by a long shot. But it's like a baller opening. I mean, in episode 2 I said, oh, it's definitely not opening of the year. I struggle to agree with that nowadays. Like, it really is fantastic. There's still parts of it that I don't like the very beginning and how it's kind of very generically J-rocky. But some of the melody stuff, like "Jibun no michi o shinjita mono dake ga itsuka kagayakeru." Oh, it's so good. I love it so much. That's like, I could listen to that little segment over and over again, and it helps a lot that the animation jumps massively in quality for that little segment. So like that specifically, I think, is opening of the decade quality. Like, really fantastic stuff. I love the music here. I think this is Moody Blue's like actual theme versus the piano, which you know, I got comments about it in the previous episode. The piano is actually from Giorno's theme, and in fact I was hoping that they would repeat it here just so I could listen to it again, but I guess I'll have to go back to episode 5 for that. I mean, at this point they were still playing the da 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 stuff, so, and I was busy singing that, so I'm really glad that they actually repeated this because it allows me to just like talk about it now. Like this close-up, for instance, I really liked like just how every single frame of this is animated, and I've talked about that multiple times now, how you don't have to animate every single frame if the intent is really simple. And the emotion you're trying to communicate is really simple. But here the emotion isn't so like one-dimensional. Like, there's a lot in Giorno's eyes and in Giorno's words that needs to be communicated. And well, they do it using frame-by-frame animation, right? Like, so there's a lot of determination in his eyebrows. You can see in his eyes, for instance, like, look at that look in his eyes, the grit teeth, the slight frown, like everything is so perfectly done. And this is just one frame. When we start the animation, some of that is actually a bit more exaggerated. So when he's like leaving, essentially, like when he's going off, his expression actually softens. And so it actually kind of feels, you know, as expressive as this whole thing is, it actually feels a bit more jovial as Giorno like says his goodbye. He's like, you can do it, right? Bye, Abakio, right? And he just like ninjas off, essentially. Let me see if I can pause it on. There you go. Like you can see his lips just like arcing up in that particular way, and you can see like the slight smile that he's got. There you go. Ah, it's that smile back from episode 1 where he's smiling as he steals Koichi's bag. Like that's the, as I said, that's the smile that is Giorno. That is Giorno's character right there, and that's what makes him such a beautiful protagonist. Compared with Bruno, who's really emotive and, you know, really gripped by his impulses. Like Giorno can just like get shit done, and he's powerfully confident about the shit he does. So there you go. That's like I said, that is Giorno. That smile, that's Giorno. And then we get this little animation, which I really like. In the manga, there's this really dynamic, you know, shot with a lot of foreshortening, with a lot of like speed lines and stuff that I really, really like. But I think, as I've said before, you know, the best way to express stuff emotionally in manga is not the best way to express stuff emotionally in anime. So you can't just like copy paste every single panel and then be like, there you go, this is what it looks like in a 16:9 aspect ratio, because that looks like shit. So instead they give this really dynamic animation of Giorno essentially sprinting through the boat, and you really get the feeling that these guys don't have even the time to react to what he's doing, because we don't, right? Like we don't even, it's like, oh wait, whoa, and then he just like sprints through, and he's basically moving faster than the eye can see. He's moving faster than the average frame per second of an anime. It's such a rapid movement that when Bruno is like, what the hell are you doing? It's like, yeah, we're totally feeling this. And like, look at Bruno's expression. Like, it really communicates everything you need to know. Again, like a brilliant little touch there. Oops, just punched the microphone. And then we get this. Now, some of you guys were saying that this arm is really stretchy like this because it foreshadows Soft Machine's power. Now, Soft Machine doesn't actually stretch like this. You know, Bruno compares it to a condom. I'm sure you all have your own experiences with how stretchy a condom is. But, you know, you can really compare it to a balloon, especially with, you know, the idea of inflating it with air. You can stretch it to some degree, but, you know, if you try and stretch it as far as this is stretched, then you're going to tear the balloon. That's how balloons work, right? Like, I'm not going crazy here. It's interesting, I think, that people are saying that Soft Machine works like this, because I don't think it does at all. And the reason why they're actually representing Soft Machine like this is actually because of a principle of animation called squash and stretch, which I actually mentioned in this very episode. Squash and stretch, and you can read about this on Wikipedia if you're interested in animation. Squash and stretch is essentially, you can really exaggerate the dimensions of an object in order to communicate the kind of movement that it's getting. So like a ball, when it's bouncing, for instance, flattens really quite severely if it's a super bouncy ball, right? Its height really squashes down, but then the width of the object, of the ball, the bouncy ball, stretches to a massive amount, and that's to maintain the illusion that the object has the same volume, right? So you lose height, but you gain width. So that's the kind of general principle of squash and stretch. And what that does is it makes the object feel much more alive and realistic, even if it is overly exaggerated. And I think that's the general idea that they're going for here. Now, obviously, you know, this is a lot more volume than what just Soft Machine's arm would look like. But this level of exaggeration is, I think, typical of anime, because they have fewer frames per second. So any squash and stretch or any of the principles of animation that they have, they really need to, like, enunciate. It's kind of a weird way of saying it, but you guys know what I mean. Like, they really have to exaggerate it to communicate it in what few frames they have. You know, you could make the argument, as you in the comments were saying, the stretching aspect of Soft Machine's arm here is meant to represent his power of flattening things, but it could also be some very fluid and good looking animation. And one of the reasons why in the previous episode I was so insistent, you know, we've got the thick lines here, which I specifically mentioned, but one of the reasons why I said this was such good animation is because I believe this was a use of one of the 12 principles of animation, which anime uses all too infrequently. So to see it used so prominently is really rewarding. And that's specifically why I said it was good looking animation. But if you guys want to interpret this as foreshadowing of Soft Machine's power, then I guess that's one way of looking at it. And I love this. Okay, so Bruno tries rushing in. And, you know, in the previous episode we were talking about how Abakio wants to help his friends, right? Like, and I said something very specifically. If you've got a stand power, the chance that you don't use it to save your friends is really, really, really low. And in fact, as much as a stand power is your natural impulse and your personality, right? If your natural impulse isn't to save your friends when they're in trouble, then, and maybe, to run away or to be aloof about it, then I would say your temperament isn't particularly conducive to being a stand user, right? So the chances of being chosen by the arrow is quite small. And the chances of having a stand such as Moody Blues, as powerful or even with as interesting or useful a power as Moody Blues is really, really, really very low. And so for Abakio to not be helping his friends at this point in time is really taking all of his resolve and all of his self-denying faculties, let's say, to essentially say, well, you know what, screw it, because Giorno's here at the moment, and frankly, letting Giorno know my power is more dangerous than whatever soft machine is currently doing to the rest of my friends. But this moment when Bruno tries to help, and then Abakio steps in to interrupt is so cool. It's not in the manga, which is why I like it even more. Because it really shows like Abakio recognizes to some level how foolish he's being. And so he's willing to say, Bruno, stop.
You have been stopped. I don't want to. No.
Permission denied. Right. This is my fight. And I'm going to show that brat Giorno just how much of my fight it is by using my specific sand. And, Bruno, like, back off. I'm going to do this. Like, that's such a cool statement for him to be making. And the way he just, like, steps in with his clenched fist. So cool. I love it so much. As for how that ties into his backstory, we've talked about how he's hardened his heart, right? And so on some level, you wonder whether his decision to not help Narancia immediately is that hardening of the heart, or whether, Giorno's interference is actually letting him be a bit more emotional and a bit more angry. Because, like that's how Abakio's been portrayed, like someone who's completely unaffected by the world. Is that a word? Unaffected? I hope it is. Someone who isn't affected by the world whatsoever, and he's very cold to it and distant from it, and he's willing to sacrifice everything if it means, the orders passed on from above are satisfied, just because it gives his life meaning to, like deny his ideologies. But at the same time, like here, he does find an ideology, and that ideology is fuck Giorno. Wow. As I was saying that, I just realized how absurd it sounded. But really, like, that's his ideology. It's fuck you, Giorno. Now, like, he's brought to care about the situation that he's in because of conflict with Giorno. And so, like, maybe, again, like, we see some of that idea that I was talking about. Like, Giorno is the golden wind that so this is Abakio's hardened heart. And this is the golden wind that's blowing it away. Woo, go away. So I think that's, where we can place Abakio in this particular fight. And really kind of solidifies Abakio and Giorno's relationship in a very unique way. That we didn't necessarily get in the manga. Because obviously in the manga, we hadn't had Abakio's backstory at this time. So you wonder, whether Araki was maybe like just coming up with bullshit to when he was talking about Abakio's backstory. Because surely, if someone is so dispirited and so depressed that they just feel no emotion and no reason to live at all. And the manga page, which I've still got up, actually says he lost all sensation within him. You wonder why he's getting so angry at Giorno in these particular scenes. And you wonder, once again, if that hardened heart of his, that emotionless husk, is maybe being breathed back into life. Hey, there you go, by the stand that gives objects life. Gold experience. That's beautiful animation. Like, you really get a weight of how heavy... You really get a weight of Giorno's character, of Bruno's character. I keep doing that, I'm sorry. Bruno and Giorno I keep confusing. If I say Bruno and I meant Giorno, or if I said Giorno and I meant Bruno, then hopefully you guys can figure it out. Anyway, so like, firstly, Bruno looks bloody beautiful here. But the way he like, obviously, there's the anticipation of him like backing up, and then he leaps forward, so that's really, really good. And then he jumps forward. Crunchyroll skipped a couple of frames there, but even that was really smoothly animated. He jumps forward, and then he gets restrained. And even then, we get a couple of frames where he's still moving forward, and then he slows down, and then he gets pulled back. Seriously, such beautiful animation there. And you really get a feel of, especially with the hair, which is secondary movement, and that's another principle of animation. You really get a feeling of the intensity with which Bruno is moving, and the strength with which Abakio held him back. And once again, that's the same movement as Abakio interrupting Bruno's movements by literally stepping in front of him with the clenched fist. That kind of repetition of thought is really good to, set up a certain type of character trait. And I was talking about that with Giorno, who says you're a good person, right? I talked about that in episode 3, I think, or episode 4. And I compared it with Josuke, whose only significant character trait in early part 4 was Tebe, ima ore no atama no koto nansta? What the fuck did you just say about my hair? So this kind of repetition is really powerful, and David Production pulling it off with Abakio to make him all the more meaningful, I think. And I love this line as well. Like, he's like, don't go in there. In fact, please go away. Brilliant line. I love this. Like, this isn't in the manga, like these black eyes, that's not in the manga, but they understand the aesthetic enough to just like put it on him anyway. That's such a fundamental understanding of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that David Production are proving they have, that it's actually kind of remarkable. The trade-off is one of my favorite frames from this chapter is actually discarded, and it's one of Abakio looking really kind of scary. And I'll put that will be on the screen right now. So take a good look at that and weep that we didn't get it in the anime. Okay, so if there's one thing that I don't like about stand rushes, it's kind of like the idea that you can actually see the swinging of the punches, if you will. Like in the manga, all you see is like, here's a fist, and here's a fist, and here's a fist, and here's a fist, and they all like rush out at once, right? Like there's no moments of swinging, like they're all just already there, and that's such a powerful image for a stand to have. Like it's so fast that all you see is a flurry of fists. But here you can actually see like the general movement of the fists like coming around. And you can even see like the impact they're making, and that is, I think, a significantly weaker image. But I mean, like, I don't know how you'd solve that, because like it is animation in the end, and you need to communicate it through animation. And someone, very correctly pointed out that anything less would just be like a PowerPoint presentation essentially, and like that's just not worth listening to, or that's just not worth watching. But still, like it just doesn't feel as strong as I would have liked it to be. Maybe it's the sound effects, like maybe if you just heard like like some kind of super powered machine gun, then that would have been a bit more satisfying. But I don't know, like something about it just feels lacking. This looks really good though, like the way the zipper actually explodes out like that. Oh, so good. But again, the weight with which like that exploded and the size of this particular hole that Sticky Fingers just put into the ship, I don't think quite matches the weight with which we saw him like swinging up and down, right? Like some of it's something's lacking there, and I don't exactly know what it is. Comments if you feel something similar, because I feel like it's a bit heretical to say, David Production isn't getting the stands right, because I think that there's one thing they freaking have nailed. It's the stand abilities. And like I just said, like look at how they're representing this. Like, they're paying a lot of respect to what the stands look like. And the stand designs and stuff. It's just like that tiny little, the idea of the stand rush and all of these fists coming out at once, like those instants I think are they just tickle me the wrong way. Another racking shot here, which for those of you who haven't seen episode 1, is when the background like goes out of focus so that the foreground comes into focus, or the other way around, like the foreground comes out of focus and the foreground comes. Wait, shit, what? The foreground goes out of focus and then the background comes into focus. That's called a racking shot, and it's used a lot in cinematography. And anime has started using it very often now that digital is so prominent, and you can do all of this stuff so easily on a computer. And like the use of depth of field is really, really cool. Like look at the way the water is blurred out, and it looks realistic as well. So that use of CG there looks really good. And Bruno is a little bit out of focus there as well. It just looks really good. So I guess the point I'm trying to make there is, a lot of people have a bone to pick with digital stuff. They're like, oh, bring back the shell-shaded stuff. And, shell-shaded has its own very distinct charm, and I wouldn't take that away from cell-shaded ever. But really, like, you're losing so much when it's not digital that it's actually a little bit embarrassing to even say that. Hell yeah, this was in the preview. I love it. I love this. Oh, I love that. Just the way he comes through the door and his stand aura starts glowing, and then we see this beautiful shot of him like walking through and summoning Moody Bruce. Moody Bruce. Shivers down my spine. I mean, that sound effect of like the dial, so good. I didn't really expect them to use something like that. I don't know if that's something that they took from the manga, like the sound effects. Like, how can I say this? there's a very specific kind of Japanese onomatopoeia for phone dials that Araki happened to use, and the Japanese animators recognized it and decided to use it there. I wonder. And of course, all of that stand summoning stuff that I've been talking about since episode 1, they just like nailed it here. Well, you know, they've got like this really cool effect. And then, oh god, like you can hear the time rewinding in the background, like the sounds rewinding. And then you get all of these beautiful shots. What was I talking about with the depth of field? What was I talking about with the coloring? Oh my god, it looks so good. And of course, you know, all these lines. Christ, man. David Production, you bloody legends. And this, you know, this is episode 6. Episode 6 of Diamond is Unbreakable started looking like ass. And this is the quality that we're still getting for Vento Aureo. And it's like, thank you. Thank you for taking 2 bloody years to make this worthwhile. This is the kind of shot that, like, I would love to see in a JoJo movie. Like, I've been thinking about what a JoJo movie would look like, having seen the Diamond is Unbreakable movie and not being particularly, you know, excited by it. But stuff like this, right? Like him just walking through a door so casually and so smoothly. And, you know, not like acknowledging the camera, but, you know, like the camera is still following him. That kind of feeling that, you know, you are in this extant 3D world, right? And it's not just like a series of 2D flat planes like sliding against each other. So, and that's exactly what I want to see in a live action JoJo, if possible. And of course, more beautiful animation here. Yeah. And of course, that's all digital. Like the effects they had there, like that was all digital. But then this was all hand drawn. So it's like the amount of the way they balance like the digital and the hand drawn stuff is so cool. Like imagine if Pulpo's arm had actually, you know, animated itself out of the bed like in this way. Like that would have been so much more rewarding. But then here, you know, like this coloring, and the way like the coloring actually reveals itself. This is all digital, so it's like the best of both worlds, and JoJo, like Vento Aureo, is just nailing it so beautifully. Like, this is what the lowest bar of animation in anime should be, in my opinion. Like, this should be generic animation, but it's not. It's like exceptionally amazing, and that, I think, speaks to how sad the anime industry is in terms of producing meaningful content. And it also speaks to how much work David Production is putting into making this the best thing they can make in as sad a industry as what it is currently. Sorry to be so salty, it's just frustrating. And so this is another really cool digital thing that you can do. They have the same background, they have the same animation for Narancia. Just delete the layer that had the boombox and the layer that had Mista. Boom! Legendary animation. What else do you need? And then that, like, just the way he's sped up, and even the audio is sped up. I love it. I love it so much. So this, I think they did a fantastic job animating. I hope I don't have to explain why, because it should really speak for itself. So I'm just going to play it and have you guys revel in it. And the sound design, and the way his arms deflate. And like that, like look at that. Wow, bloody hell. Like what a frame to just pause it on. Tender Machine. You wonder if they wanted to put like Wet Machine as a reference to Soft and Wet. Beautiful animation. And of course, once again, the use of digital there to use layers to communicate that it has indeed paused, despite not having to show Narancia's forehead and instead just showing his shoes and his deflated legs and such. Looks really good. So this is actually interesting. They cut out a series of panels that shows Bucciarati like unzipping the pipes and showing Narancia's like stretched face, like kind of jammed into the pipes, which explains a lot, but also confuses, you know, the general issue, because he does the same thing later, but he's not in the pipes. And so instead of being like, there's more of a mystery here, instead it's like, wait, so what was the difference between unzipping the pipe the first time and unzipping the pipe the second time? And by just removing that dichotomy, it's just like, well, there you go. Like, we don't need to address that part of the issue at all. So, like, I really respect how far David Production have gone to make the Soft Machine fight, like, make sense, essentially, and not just have it be this confusing mess of ideas for, you know, the first fight that the Gangstars actually have against a meaningful opponent. This is a really cool effect. Obviously, they've got the CG in the background with the pipes and stuff, which looks pretty cool. But then this... the way they've layered Abakio's eyes on top, you really get a feeling that, you know, this isn't Abakio's real sight. It's actually, you know, like his spiritual sense, if you will. And to represents the sight that you get from your stand instead of your physical sight in this way is, I think, really interesting. Because there's a couple of times, aren't there, where, you know, it seems like the stand user isn't using his actual eyes, but rather using his stand's eyes. So with Star Platinum, for instance, Star Platinum is a really good exploration of this, because there's multiple times where Jotaro, being kind of like the Superman of the franchise, is like, yeah, Star Platinum also has really strong eyesight, and he'll see something like way out into the sea. I think that's one of the plot points from part 4. When he goes to recover Joseph. We never really got a good sense of what that might look like from Jotaro's perspective, and here I think they've got a pretty good approximation of it. So, and like, this is really cool as well. Like, just the idea that you can sense where your stand is and therefore follow it as it follows something else is such an interesting idea. Moody Blues, I think, is the only one that really gets to play with that because of, you know, its rewinding abilities. So, you know, it's chasing something in the past, and Abakio specifically is chasing Moody Blues. 5 meters of Jekyll and Hyde played with something similar. I'll put the relevant frames up for those of you guys who haven't read it. We really only get to get a good glimpse of it here, and you know, of all things, a fan work like 5 meters of Jekyll and Hyde actually really nails what's kind of crazy and cool and really interesting about Abakio's stand. So yeah, that's the value of that's the value of fan works, I think. Like, they really get to play with ideas that Araki didn't have the time to, or the curiosity to really dig at. And again with this, in fact, I think this is exactly the same animation, so, well, you guys understand what I'm trying to say, even if it isn't. It's just not as rewarding. That was really rewarding though, like the way it so smoothly zips across. Oh, they really get the zippers and sticky fingers. What makes them so rewarding to, you know, like, think about and imagine, like, just the way you can just open zippers in any arbitrary surface, right? Like, that's such a cool idea. One of my favorite stands. So, yeah, as I was talking about before, Bucciarati does previously open a pipe in the manga, and it's got Narancia just kind of like stuffed in here. Like, you can see Narancia's eyes, for instance, just kind of like bulging out, and you're like, ah. But then here you don't see it, and, you know, that's kind of meant to confuse you, but I think Araki was a little bit too good at confusing you in this particular fight, and the anime fixes it. I don't actually know how this works in terms of stand space. Like, you wonder why what's his face? Moody Blues didn't just phase out of the wall like stands can do? Question mark. But this is beautifully animated. Like, just the way he's feeling the arc of the room. It's really cool. I love it. But just to briefly talk about, like, what is exactly going on here, you wonder if Soft Machine has some kind of like boundary power as well. So, you know, for this particular scenario where he's wrapped a flattened thing on top of a non-flat thing, you can actually bind things in the space between those two things. God, so confusing. But hopefully you know what I mean. Like, there's the real object here, and then there's the surface that's wrapped on top. And then anything in between can't actually escape through the flattened surface. And obviously can't escape through the real surface as well. But then, like, this is a stand, so, like, it doesn't exist to begin with. It exists in non-physical space, so where is it trapped? Hello? So confusing. I don't get it. And it's like, this is the kind of stuff that, as much as David Production wants to fix, you really can't. Because it's just like, it's the confusion that's baked into the structure of the fight. And to rewrite that and to remove this would be to literally rewrite the entire fight, so that Abakio's Moody Blues does actually just break out, and then it's like, oh, well, I guess we have our stand back now. And then Abakio wouldn't have been captured by Zucchero, and then, like, the final arc of the fight would have just been nothing. So here, you know, the anime takes pains to show the Lagoon 2 thing and Abakio almost recognizing it. They even make his eyes red just to show that, like, you know, he's using his sense of sight. They really, like, nail it in how Abakio figured it out, because in the manga, like, there really isn't this at all. Like, there's no clues at all, and it's such an asshole. There you go, so, like, Lagoon 2. There you go. 10 out of 10. So very good recognition of the fact that this fight does need more hints so that the viewers themselves can solve it to some degree before even Bruno can. Bruno looks really ridiculously bad here. But the color swap at least looks really good. So then we get like this beautiful little animated section of Abakio just like turning to a deflated balloon. I was talking about this before, but the way Bruno's weighted and, well, the way Abakio isn't weighted. And like the fluidity and like just how much effort is going into every single one of these frames looks so good. And of course, you know, just how despairing Bruno looks as he reaches for him and then falls to the ground. Ah, it's so, like that's such a beautiful short segment. And then it's capped off with Bruno's beautiful voice acting. And in fact, there's so many little things that the anime has actually added in, like the little slap that Abakio did, that's not in the manga. This little animation that Bruno's about to do of him like, you know, kind of like looking away from the fly and climbing up here and accidentally kicking off the... Like little stuff like this, it's just... That's not in the manga, but... You know, like it really carries the intensity of the scene through and the horror, so you know, like the horror elements as well. So it is a bit overstated, I think. You know, part 3 suffered to some degree because of that, but unlike part 3, this is actually like a really intense scene where it's not, here's the JoJo of the part and he's gonna destroy the enemy using Star Platinum's Ora Ora Ora. Like it's not even a special attack, he's literally just punching it. It's like we've got Bruno, who doesn't know how to defeat the enemy. And literally all of his friends are gone and dead. Or, you know, not dead, but about to be killed if he doesn't comply. And so you can really start feeling the emotion and the intensity that Bruno's feeling to a much greater degree than any of the scenes in part 3. Even if it is filler, it's in a much better place emotionally than any of the actual canon scenes from part 3. I got a couple of comments from people being like, oh, you're replacing actual canon scenes from the manga with filler scenes. And it's like, really? I dare you to call this filler. Because it's genuinely making the manga better. And especially this one fight that really suffers from a lack of forethought on Araki's part. Sticky fingers, orange sticky fingers, hell yeah. Looks good. And so that, again, like he's got beautiful voice acting from Bruno, beautiful animation on Sticky Fingers punching, and then like you zoom out and it's just like this tiny little space, and it's not even like the entire deck of the ship that's just been wrecked, it's just this tiny little space, and it feels unsatisfying, it really does. Zukero's voice actor. So I find it really interesting that they equate in some sense Zukero's presence with this fly here, and it's not done to this degree in the manga. They really make sure this fly is like the main threat that Buchilasi was facing against, but he's really just Narancha's shoe, right? So like Bruno is antagonizing Narancha's shoe given life by Giorno, so this is in fact like this, you know, all throughout this fight, this has been helping Bruno Abakio, but now they've kind of spun that on its head and made it the antagonist. And in a way, like that's a very horror-esque thing to do, to like take something that you recognize as something that you find respite in, for instance. So for example, in houses, in horror movies and such, what they'll do is they'll say, well, this room is safe, right? You go into this room, you're safe. And then what they'll do is they'll put the monster, that's the monster, they'll put the monster behind the room, right? They'll put it inside the room, and suddenly like you go into the room and now the room itself is a threat despite it being a safe room. And that I think is what they're doing with this fly. Like this fly that was previously helping them is now the antagonist, and so it really does feel a lot more engaging in that way. And Zukero isn't just like this invisible voice that just whispers to Buchirati. Like it really does feel like it's coming from the fly itself. And the weird thing about JoJo is flies have been antagonists to the various Joe Bro gangs before. So for example, in part 3, on the very first plane that we see, you know, we get Tower of Grey. And that's like a beetle of some kind, right? But it's still like a fly-like entity. And it still talks to them in this kind of way. So it's actually kind of interesting that they're kind of calling back to it like this. Does Tower of Grey talk? Am I just imagining that? See, like they really antagonize the fly. And this is kind of lazy actually, but I can forgive them because of the various spurts of amazing animation. But like this particular frame just stays here for like a minute or so. And Bruno here doesn't look that good, but some of the color manipulation and stuff that you'll be seeing as we play this, in fact, is really, really interesting. And the way, like, you know, they focus in on Bruno, they pull in the close-up, which I've been talking about before, right? Like, you really want to close in on someone's face to give that emotion some weight. And if you don't do that, then all you get is like this, and it really is so low resolution that you just feel no empathy for Bruno whatsoever. And then yeah, like if we go back to where it was, like by the time we get to the end of the you know, the color transition and stuff. Like, look how warped and scary this whole thing has become. And if, you know, if this was more of a horror scene rather than an action scene, then maybe, you know, the effects that we're seeing in the background would have been a greater representation for Bruno's state of mind, let's say. I would really like to see David Production do like a horror adaptation, play around with some of these ideas that they've got for JoJo, like the color swaps and all of these like weird digital effects that they're just happy to plaster everywhere to give it like the mood necessary to convey all of these little scary technicalities, let's say. Like it's interesting. So I laughed at Tsukura's voice acting in the previous episode because it was very humorous, you know, him just going Uchi no hate shirane no yoni, right? And just like his stupid voice. But here they go extra ham on it, and I love it all the more. This close-up of this fly is like completely absurd from the perspective of the manga, where the fly is just some like little thing that's floating around in the panels, and you just see like the words in like speech bubbles, and the fly's just like flying around it and completely divorced from any of Zukero's actual words. Like, but here, you know, they're really unifying the two. And, you know, on some level, you know, there's an interesting level of visual communication that David Production are espousing, but on the other hand, it does kind of border on the absurd. So I'm sure some of you were like, this is way, way, way too much, but I actually kind of like it. It's interesting that in Japanese they're not called blacktails, they're called umi neko, which means sea cats, which is why they make the nya nya sound, as Bruno's about to say. Badass. I love the way like Bruno literally shouts over him and his physical, you know, his physical appearance actually is like directly superimposed on top of him. I love this theme so much. And in fact, you know, when I read the chapters that are so, you know, central to Bruno's character, like his backstory, like his betrayal of the boss, and his fight against Diavolo at San Giorgio Maggiore, I hear this music in my head, and it's so moving, and it's so powerful, and it's so evocative. It's so cool, and I can't wait to get there. Of course, that will be like, what, like 14, 15 episodes down the line. But seriously, such a good song. And this water is beautifully animated as well, can I just say? And there you see the Lagoon 2, and then Lagoon 1 peels out from under it. And in fact, in the manga, there is no distinction between Lagoon 2 and Lagoon 1. They both just say Lagoon. So once again, more proof that David Production did the right thing by having these little filler scenes that really explained what the bloody hell is going on in this fight. I was kind of hoping that they'd animate this, because this is really the thing that proves that the conceit of the fight is as stupid as it seems, that there was just like a boat wrapped on top of another boat. It's such a stupid... Araki, what were you smoking? And it would have been nice to like have seen that, you know, perfectly animated. But I guess that little silhouette that I saw, that we saw rather, right here, I guess kind of is, you know, I guess it's detailed enough and it's well animated enough that it serviceably represents the general intent of what the hell Bruno means when he says there were two boats. Sadly, it's Lagoon 1 that sings, which I think is interesting, because Bruno of course rented that, so you wonder whether he's gonna have to pay back for it later, and whether there's a scene in the anime where he actually does. This is paralleled in the Bruno's fight against Pesci, against Beach Boy. This exact line. So I really like that this is a consistent theme throughout part 5. Hell yeah. Let me... So good. I love that they had that little touch where his shadow actually extended. Like, that's... Whoever's directing this stuff needs a freaking award, man. It's interesting that they give it this much weight. Kind of reminds me of Kira versus Josuke in episode 38 of DIU. Where, you know, you get the two of them like staring down against each other, and Josuke says this awesome line. I'm gonna quote the Duang version because I think it's the best one so far. He says, Dashina, teme no kira kuin wo, which in the Duang translation is "Show your killer queen." Oh, it's so good. That's like the one Duang panel that I think is beautifully translated and probably better than any of the other ones. Like, it's so simple and so evocative. Show your killer queen. In the anime, just that like one scene of the two of them staring each other down takes like a minute straight of like color swaps and like different panels just being like represented. You can watch it again if you want. It's one of my favorite scenes in anime. And here they give it almost an equivalent amount of weight. Like, they really just stare each other down like crazy. They really make sure that it feels weighty and it feels like a satisfying conclusion to the fight. Almost too satisfying, to be honest, because, you know, it is kind of a weird and confusing fight to begin with, and Zucchero isn't that threatening of a person, especially when he's been represented as a fly previously. So it's just like a weird moment to really hype up and build expectations for. This, I think, is interesting because it really shows the fact that Bruno learned from Giorno in that initial fight. Like the way he punches himself and then unzips to extend his range. Really cool. I guess choreography would once again be the most correct word for it. By punching himself, which is something that Bruno actually does quite consistently later on, it establishes that action, let's say. Helps us to remember that visual language for when it's used later, which, as I said before, is something that Araki did with the fly, like the fly returning to whoever the object belongs to. That kind of preservation of visual language is, I think, really very necessary for a series like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which relies so much on visual traits of certain stands in order to communicate what the bloody hell is going on. I think stuff like this, where you really show as much as possible, and especially Bruno actually punching his arm, is, I think, really, really important. I like how he grabs Sticky Finger's arm and not like his own arm. Like, that's so weird. Pa! And that's beautiful animation. I mean, like, when I was watching this, I was like, this is what regular anime looks like super 2D and flat. And then this is what JoJo looks like, which is like super heavily shaded, and you've got the blacks and you've got actual depth to the characters. This is really cool. I like how it shows the two of them as being really close and, really trusting each other. I've thought often that Abakio could have been a really convincing female character. And not just because he has long hair, but because I think the relationship that these two have really does border on the romantic. And I really want to make a video of the fact that a lot of these characters could indeed have been female, especially in part 5, which does have perhaps the first meaningfully engaging female character in Trish. And like, if Abakio had been female, we would have gotten maybe like an actual romance between him and Bruno. It kind of explains like some of the aggression he feels towards Giorno, because it's kind of like she would be feeling jealous. Of course, Narancia would have to be female at that point, because there's no excuse not to. And maybe we could have some relationship there with Fugo. And it's kind of like a relationship built on a rivalry, which, kind of keeps the physical aspects of it, let's say, like Fugo stabbing Narancia with a fork, for instance. It kind of keeps that there, but it's also like flirting to some degree, as much as like two messed up teenage gangsters can flirt with each other, I suppose. And, maybe then Giorno would have been female as well, and then we would have gotten two female JoJos in the franchise rather than just Jolene. This relationship specifically is, I think, the most convincing one, like just having Abakio be female. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think. And then to be continued. This is actually interesting because we do get a post-credit scene later, and I think this is the first time that the post-credit scene isn't the one with the to be continued. It's actually the pre-credit scene that gets the to be continued. That's just, in fact, I don't even know if that's the case. Like, there might have been other episodes where there have been post-credit scenes, but the to be continued still came before the credits. I don't know. I guess it doesn't help. I'm suggesting that these two might be in a romantic relationship, and literally the next thing that you hear is every time I close my eyes, I wake up feeling so horny. Bloody hell. I can't imagine a time when I actually wanted Gangster's Paradise as an ending theme, because this is just too perfect. I mean, like, some people have complained about this ending theme, but I mean, like, the bloody protagonist stand is named after a Prince song. Like, is it so sinful to be using like a sexy song, let's say, when that is the case, that we're referencing Prince songs? Like, that's where we are, guys. Let's not forget that. So again, Abakio looking like a stray dog, really kind of pitiful and sad. Nani? So these are lines that let's say Abakio's partner says at a future point in the story.
そこに至る道筋だ
And then only by, finding that correct path to your destination do you actually find the truth. Those are the words that come up later. And
俺のチームに来い
wow, like they're actually having Bruno say it, and that's like really, really touching, I think. So like, they had at Abakio's death, they have him looking back at his past and being like, yeah, I've made my choices and I've made the most out of them, and I'm proud to be where I am. And here is Bruno saying, listen, you can't live like this. You can be something greater. And thus, Abakio's fate was set in stone. And he's got a new look in his eyes. I love that. Like, look how determined he looks now. In that frame that we saw earlier, you really saw how lost he was. And you could see it in his eyes, how gazeless and unfocused they were. Especially in the way the lids were closed to different lengths. They really don't communicate sight or vision. All he sees is like this blur of the past. I guess in a way it's kind of like Cowboy Bebop if you've seen that. But now he does see something, and well, who does he see? Bucciarati. And so, one of the lines that's constantly been coming back to me as I've been watching the scene is Abakio, when he joins Bruno's rebellion, says, the only time I feel peace at heart is when I'm with you. And that's, well, there you go. That's another place where the romance could have been tied if Abakio was female. And, I'm not saying that, Abakio couldn't have been gay. I don't want to piss off the members of the fandom, the Fujoshi, let's say, who are watching this, that actually, do ship Bruno and Abakio as being a homosexual couple. It's not that I'm saying that it's inappropriate for Abakio to have been a homosexual, or even Bruno for that matter. All I'm saying is it would have made it a lot more explicit if Abakio had been female, both in terms of how Araki writes and in terms of how we can interpret his writing. Because, as much as JoJo likes to play with homosexual undertones, which I did say in a kind of jokey way in episode 1, but I really do believe, and I've been thinking of writing an essay just about that. As much as JoJo does include homosexual undertones, I think, sadly, that's all they've remained. Undertones. And Araki has never fully committed to main characters that are actually interested in each other in this way. It's easy to wonder whether Araki could have baked that into the story, or whether it would have just been too much for Part 5 to handle, like on top of all this stuff about Bruno betraying the gang and all of the backstories for all these people. Now they also have to be in romantic relationships with each other. It really does seem like quite a lot to ask of Vento Aureo. Maybe if it was like a standalone work, and it was, like 20 plus volumes long, and kind of more of like a generic shonen, maybe then you could say that we could have built some of these romances, but, for a JoJo part, which are inherently pretty small scale stories, I'd say. I mean, I compare them to albums in one of my videos, and albums, they're not long, they're like a 40-minute experience, and I was very cogent of that when I made that specific comparison, because it's not like One Piece or Naruto that goes on for hundreds of volumes. It's very self-contained, and the stories have a very deliberate focus on things that don't necessarily relate to the drama of these characters so much as the drama of their interaction with the outside world and threats posed by other people onto them. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is the relationships in JoJo are better characterized as conflicts versus other people, and the people who join you in fighting against those conflicts, rather than, the other way around, which is the relationships you have with people, the positive relationships, the ones that, like friendships and romances and stuff, which certainly you would get in other manga, like, look at all these friends I've made, with the power of friendship we will defeat the enemy, right? Like, that's the exact opposite of what JoJo is, which is, we have an enemy to face, let's make some friends to defeat that enemy. Part 7 maybe is like the only exception to that, but even then it's not like a very good one. So yeah, enough rambling. We've gotten to the end of the episode. We've got some nice pretty music to listen to, I guess, for the very end. Aggressively rocky, awesome music. And so I guess I'll say that you can join me next week for episode 7. 6 bullets appear. Wrong grammar, Crunchyroll. 6 bullets appear. What are you talking about? The Sex Pistols appear, obviously, and for the first time we have a 2-part adaptation of a particular arc. So, Sono Ichi, right? Part 1, and presumably episode 8 will be part 2. So that's really interesting that they're doing that. I thought they wouldn't. I thought the entirety of Sex Pistols would be in the next episode. But if they're doing this, then I'll have to tweak some of the pacing decisions that I've made. So expect a video on that coming up sometime this week or next week. But if I have to fiddle around with this, then it might end up being next week in the end. Until then, I've got a few more videos planned. I've been saying this quite often, but I do really mean it. More mic tests. So, for those of you that have subscribed to my audiobook stuff, but you haven't been getting it, don't worry, I've got some stuff planned. It's not George Joestar and it's not Over Heaven, sad to say, but it will be more practice. So when I eventually do get to those, I won't just be like, oh, I don't know how to read, guys. I've forgotten how to read. It's going to be, it'll come more naturally to me. I'm really excited to share that with you guys. Obviously, that's not for everyone. Some of you guys, I'm assuming the majority of you guys, considering the popularity of these videos as I continue to make them, the majority of my subscribers are probably here to do this stuff. But certainly if you're curious about what kind of other videos I make on YouTube, then you can check out my mic test series, my Purple Haze Feedback audiobook series. Maybe, you can suggest some of the stuff that you want me to read. Because I certainly love to read more books and such. Yeah, I'm gonna stop ranting. Not forever, sadly. But just for this particular episode, I'm gonna end the episode here. Thank you guys very much for watching once again, and I will see you next time. Take care, everyone.